Journalists who report health and science all over the world are regarded to be more circumspect than journalists that report every other thing, because they are dealing mostly with statistics, figures, with facts. It is important to always double check the data that you get. Check that you have read and interpreted data correctly. Your story is not the number. The numbers, the statistics are actually to help you to strengthen your story, to show evidence that what you are saying in that story is correct, or to debunk claims that have been made by people. How many numbers should you use in a story? If you are writing one paragraph, your opening story, what is the average number of figures that should be in an opening paragraph?
25.
I'm talking about figures.
2.
What do you think is the maximum you should have?
2.
2 is good, but 3 is still okay. But once you pass 3 numbers, you are going into, nobody is going to, the person reading it is going to be lost in the figures. So reduce, if you can use only one number in that paragraph, use one number. Don't use multiple numbers in a story, in a paragraph. Then in broadcast, if you are on TV, what is the average number of words, of figures that you should use? On TV. 1. Focus on that one number and keep repeating it. Because on TV it's fleeting. When you have a newspaper, the person can always go back to read it. On TV, it's written in passes. So when you mention this number, mention the other number, the person becomes confused. So mention your figure and stick with it. And intermittently repeat it. Go back to it. On radio, had ever, instead of using numbers, just the same thing we were talking about before, half, about 1/4. Use more of that if you're working in radio. Because the person listening is not even seeing you, he's just listening. He will hardly remember any numbers. Throw in numbers very sparingly if you're on radio. Then don't let the numbers speak for themselves. When you put a number there, for instance, you say 25%, maybe you are quoting from the documents. Follow up with a statement that says that is 1 in 4. So that your reader does not have to start calculating the 25%, that means what? But when you say 25%, and you say that means 1 in 4 children, immediately you have simplified it because the person can relate with it. Don't let the numbers stand by themselves. And then use, what are they called now? Use visual statements, visualizations. If, for instance, you are talking about death, let's say the number of people, polio deaths. I'm just giving an example. Polio deaths in a year. In Nigeria, how many polio cases were reported in Nigeria last year? About that. Now, if you are talking about the number of polio cases reported, In other parts of the world, polio is completely blocked. Apart from how many countries now? Because India is out of the question. Polio is not even a good example of what I'm going to say. But basically what I'm saying is, use the number of people that will fill a stadium. About a truckload of people died. About, so that the person you're reporting to, the reader of your story or the listener, will have a mental picture. Use such real life cases to represent the figures and to bring them alive. Be critical of the data that you get. Don't just accept them. Interrogate them. Ask the people who are working in that area. If you are doing something on polio and you are talking about immunization figures, I think earlier this morning we were saying, doctor was telling me that he just saw in the VHS statistics that only about 23% of children in Nigeria have total immunization, have complete immunization. Only 23%. When you hear that, the first thing that comes into your mind is only 23%, but the word there is total immunization. It doesn't mean that only 23% of children have been immunized. So it is important to look at the terms and to report the right thing. Ask yourself, who was in the survey? Is the group of people representative of the larger group? If you want to talk about, you are doing a survey, you are reading a statistics that talks about children, and the people surveyed are only girls. Are girl children representative of children? What about the boys? So there is a bias already introduced in that survey. So you will know that that survey will not give you the right figures that you're looking for. Then, how large was the sample? If you want to sample, if you have a sample size of 20 for a study and a sample size of 200 for the same study in an environment, which is likely to provide you with a better result? The one with 200 sample size is likely to present you with that because you have a wider sample size. Then, if you have in country sub-regional surveys by DHS, use at least a minimum of 1,000 women. How many sub-regions do we have? We have 6. So if you're going to do that survey, the minimum you will have in each of those sub-regions, or which we call zones in our own case, will be at least 1,000 per zone, and it will be 6,000 minimum. Who paid for the survey? When you see the data that is presented to you, if you're doing something on cigarette smoking and the data you have is funded by British Tobacco, you should be suspicious. If you're doing something on a health situation and it is funded by the Ministry of Health, you should be suspect. So independence is critical in who funds that survey. So these are the things that you should look at every time you are interrogating figures. If you pick up a copy of the national surveys, the DHS surveys, the 2013 surveys presently being done, that you will find tons of stories embedded in them. Your duty is to now go behind those figures to find the stories. Every report is actually about people. It's never about the figures. The figures only help the stories to stand